All right, we're back. Round number 3 of What's Next for Jamstack. I'm really excited to be here. This is a fantastic group of people to do this with, and I can't wait to get into it. So let's do a quick round of intros and start talking Jamstack. Miriam, you want to kick us off?
I'm Miriam Schwab. I'm currently head of WordPress relations at Elementor. I'm with Elementor since June 2022 when they acquired a company I co-founded and was CEO of called Stratic, which is a static hosting and publishing platform and solution for WordPress sites. So that's just a bit about me.
Great to have you here. US.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Juhis. Super nice to be here. I'm a developer community builder from Finland, and my relationship with Jamstack come from personal web static sites, all the kind of non-commercial stuff. So happy to be part of the panel.
Great to have you here. Queen.
Hey, so my real name is Benedicte Raae. I am originally a web developer from Oslo, Norway. Kind of fall into the developer advocacy, developer marketing roles. I'm a fractional developer advocate at Outsera, and then I also do developer marketing as a contractor. And I just fell in love with Jamstack back in the day. And I just have had fun with it ever since.
I love it. Sean.
Hey, I'm Sean. I lead the developer education team at Netlify. Before 2021 or so, I spent about a decade working for agencies, and that's when I really got interested in Jamstack, and we virtually changed what we were doing overnight to fall into Jamstack. So longtime fan of both Netlify and Jamstack, and excited to chat with y'all.
Yep, me too. Thanks, Sean. So, this is going to be a really interesting conversation, and I want to start off with some. Let me share my screen. We'll bring this up. So we're going to use this as like the structure for the conversation, and let's start off with this question first. In these conversations, we've been talking about these two different ideas about what Jamstack is, or what it could be, let's say it that way. So on one end, we have Zach said this term, folder full of files. There are files that sit on a web server, and when they're requested, it just sends back a file. It's a static website. The other is this idea of static first. So it's more of like philosophy about trying to get as static as possible, but recognizing that it's not an all or nothing approach, and there's lots of nuance, and it's a spectrum of static. So let's start there. Who has thoughts on either one of those camps? And what do you think about those two ideas?
Okay.
Yeah, shoot. Let's go, Miriam.
Okay, so I was in the folder full of files camp at first. And when we were creating Stratic, we aimed for that, some like a purist philosophy of it should just be a folder full of files, and everyone should make do with that and figure it out, if it doesn't fulfill their needs. And then quickly learned that that's not how users work. Just because that's what I think that they should do doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. And we'd be like, no, but you can use this solution and implement it in your like the WordPress site would still be the origin on Stratic. So implement on your WordPress site, and then when you publish the static version, it will work. It'll be great. Like replace this with this. No, that did not work out. So we then moved on to a static first approach where we, as much as possible, it was static. But then where things needed to be dynamic and we couldn't depend on the users to do what we wanted them to do, we would use, Lambdas, serverless technologies to kind of recreate dynamic functionality in those places. So it was quite specific, but we had to move to static first. And I think that was the right thing to do. Also, in terms of making sure that users have a good experience, and also I think it's just more realistic. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I feel similarly in that when I've talked about what the Jamstack is, that static first has it has a little bit of a better ring to it, and I feel like in terms of how you can talk about what Jamstack is, how to teach this approach, it feels like a more practical way to have some of those conversations with folks who haven't maybe been in the space as long. But at the same time, it feels like one of the struggles we've had and the reasons that we're having conversations like these is because when we didn't put strong enough guardrails on what is or isn't Jamstack, then it gets really easy to start to add more things in it. And then all of a sudden it kind of loses some of the potency that it might have had at first. And so even though so I've actually kind of shifted the other way in terms of saying I might still talk to folks about, well, the practical way to approach building a website is probably static first. That has a little bit of a more practical approach. But from purely philosophical standpoint, finding some way to put guardrails around what is Jamstack feels more useful. And for that, and the first one, the folder full of files, feels like it does suffice that or fulfill that a little bit better. That's a clearly a non-answer for you, but I think if I had to pick, I would probably go with the first one, but try to figure out a way to be able to work static first into that, or those exceptions into that conversation.
For me, the static first is something that really appeals to me because I think that it kind of directs the discussion and thinking towards this kind of mindset that you can start by building things statically and then you can add on top of it when you need. So that then it's kind of similarly than what mobile first or responsive first did back in the day. It wasn't so much about what you must do, but it was how you start thinking about things. And that's why I really like the static first thinking, even though the kind of implementation might be the folder full of files.
And I think a lot of the frameworks started kind of like sneaking in things that weren't static without being really good about saying that it wasn't static. And I think that was maybe where it fell through more than we started adding things, but we started adding things and not being very vocal about this, not then working in a folder full of files anymore. Because I've been sitting kind of more on the user end and seeing people in forums and they're like, why doesn't this work anymore when I host it on wherever I'm used to host a static site? And it's because, oh, you've suddenly something was turned on that you didn't really realize was turned on, and one of your pages are no longer static. So I really like any of them, but if you do static, kind of the static first, I just think the frameworks and the hosting providers should be very vigilant about having like warnings or notes or I don't know, some very well defined way of saying like, if you use this feature, if you're using or if you're turning on this, it's no longer static, and you can't just like grab a folder and throw it up anywhere. You'll actually need to have adapters or support for that in your hosting provider. Because in the beginning too, it was very much like you could just host anywhere, and then suddenly, as a Gatsby fan, and suddenly you were like, well, this doesn't work anywhere anymore, because people asked, like Miriam said, like the users of the framework started asking for more without maybe always realizing what they were asking for. So they're like, I'm going to do this. And then we're like, yes, we'll give you that. And then they're like, well, I can't host it as a folder full of files anymore. It's like, well, you asked for something that is not possible to do in that way. But then It becomes like a little bit of an educational issue, or at least like a documentation issue that yeah, if you choose to turn these things on, you're getting that feature, you're getting that capability, but you are trading away your folder full of files.
Yeah.
And I think if I can comment on that, I think that's a really good point. Something I've been thinking about lately is that what I've always loved about, Jamstack and static sites is exactly what you mentioned, that you can just move them from one hosting to another. But I've started to notice that I've built this kind of vendor log, a really small one, but I'm using specific like serverless functions and some other kind of
Yeah, it's such a good. I think everyone here collectively highlighted all the issues and benefits of each approach, which is great. Like, I think one of the issues with Jamstack is the tent widened and widened and widened to the point where a lot of things became Jamstack. And Sean, you highlighted this. That's the risk with static first: is do we end up with the same thing where everything could be described as static first, even a very dynamic site. Like maybe you argue none of this could be static, so it is static first, but it's very dynamic. But I think the difference with static first is there's like a gravity towards static, and like an interesting productive conversation of how can I make this more static, and so my question is, how do we balance that where it's like trying to get us to being more static? And I agree with Sean as well, where if it was folder full of files, like that's like a more definite definition and perhaps easier to get your head around. But the counter to that is if someone crosses over that line, to your point, US, like we shouldn't say like, oh, you're no longer part of this community. Like you're shunned now. You have done something dynamic. You're not welcome here. Like how do we balance those two approaches, or those two opposing kind of ideas?
So I'll just go first. So I think that reality of spilling into the world of non-static is one of the challenges for Jamstack at present and over the last, I don't know, year or so, where it was great when there was a super clear definition of it and everyone knew, like you called it guardrails, I think, that where it started and where it ended, and now it doesn't really end anywhere. I know that when the Jamstack industry started talking about SSR, server side rendering, I was laughing to myself because I was like, well, that's just WordPress. Like we just come full circle, right? 100%. So I think there's a bit of an identity crisis, and I'm not sure what is defined as Jamstack anymore. So I think that the static first category, whatever that means to people, is enough to put someone in the Jamstack camp. So when someone's, when I'm talking to someone about how they should build out their site so that it's static compatible or whatever, I'll say like at every step of the way, think about whether this can be done so that it's static ready or not. And so much can be. It's just a matter of like stopping and thinking about it, right?
Exactly.
So at that point when you're building, and in many cases, it's not like it's going to take more time to develop a functionality so it's static ready. You just have to be aware of it. So I think as long as people, builders, I don't know, organizations are thinking in that way, then today, because of what Jamstack has become, they fit into that camp, and maybe people can be a little bit less opinionated about who they accept.
But I also think there's a place to kind of say that these frameworks or this way of thinking isn't for every single thing you'll ever build on the internet. Because I felt like that is what happened, because people started the marketing was pretty good, and people came in and then they wanted to do a bunch of things that maybe they shouldn't be asking for, like when they were in that camp. And then it, as you said, the tent widened. And at some point you can also say like, well, it seems for you in your case, maybe you should just go all in on server-side rendering because that's what you need, and be okay with that, instead of then trying to be like, no, this is going to be static no matter what. Then I'm going to regenerate like 1 million pages and I'm not going to pay for it. And it's going to be superb. And it's like, no, it's never going to be superb. And we should be like allowed to kind of say that, or not allowed, but we should be able to say that and say this framework isn't for that use case, or this way of thinking isn't for that use case, and not be afraid of kind of saying that. And that doesn't, like, we can still be friends. We can still hang out. Even if your product needs a different architecture, right? It's we're still all just having fun on the interwebs. Like, yeah.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, one attribute that Jamstack has always had has been this really inclusive community. And so I think even going back to folder of files versus static first, they're both kind of talking about an approach on how to build websites from the same general mentality with very similar motivations. And so even if we say, okay, those guardrails are a little fuzzy, we feel like static first fits a little bit better. The one thing that's really clear, or maybe it's two things. One is that as you have to move beyond static first, this is a welcoming community. We're happy to talk through the right approaches to take there. But then maybe, okay, the thing that we define more is the mentality we bring to the approaches we take for some set of websites. In other words, what the Jamstack wouldn't be in that case would be, hey, I'm going to start from a place of using edge functions or what it might be. Those come in if I don't have a more appropriate way to solve the problem that I'm trying to solve. Again, to the last point that it just and that can depend on the type of product or application that you're trying to build.
Yeah, I think I have a slightly different way of thinking, because I think that people are going to use the terms in various ways, and that's something that we as a community cannot control. We cannot control somebody just using Jamstack to advertise something that they do, even if it's not Jamstack. So I've never been a big stickler or kind of worrying about that. And I like to lead with example, so that the kind of tutorials or guides or the marketing that we as a community create, we can then through that show what Jamstack means to us, rather than telling people that this is not Jamstack and this is not Jamstack and this is not Jamstack. And I think you, Benedict, said it really well, that it's some people or some projects, rather, they evolve maybe from static to something more kind of complex, and that's perfectly fine, I think. And then if we draw really kind of strict fences around, this is our plot of land, then it might also discourage people from kind of moving between the dynamic and the static whenever the projects need that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And it's actually a good segue for the next question. Let me bring it up. So it's a question of who. And I've put some ideas on here, but I don't want this to be an exhausted list. But like, who is this community for is quite an interesting question. I think the more specific we can be, like the more like welcoming and tighter community we can have. But it's interesting kind of thinking about this from multiple angles and who's in the Jamstack, or at its peak, who was in the Jamstack community. So here I've got experienced web developers, beginner web developers, marketers / people wanting a website. This was a big one in the early days where static was this looked down upon word because people thought it being very basic and limited. So that was one reason for Jamstack being coined in the first place, is for both technical and non-technical audiences to bring new light to static websites. Developers building on the fundamentals of the web, that was something that was really highlighted in the last panel, that this community really cares about that. These last two are, I think it was coined by Chris Coyer, the front of the front end developers and the back of the front end developers. So this is like front of the front end's more like CSS and style, and there's like a whole depth of knowledge there. And back of the front end is like more JavaScript frameworks. And it's just highlighting there's actually two different skill sets in the front end now. And there's a bit of a split there. So what's everyone's take on I guess looking forward, what groups should Jamstack be catering to?
I would steal the kind of tagline of the 11D conference That's a really good community or kind of description. Rather than thinking about their backgrounds, thinking about what they want to do and making website real good. I think it's a really good description of the Jamstack community.
I love that.
But I must say also, I think for me, Jamstack kind of snuck me from the front end towards the back end of the front end, because I was, for some reason, kind of afraid of the back end. I don't know why, but it's like the vibe was like, that's for the like serious engineers or whatever. I have a master of computer science, but for some reason I was like, I'm not that like serious of an engineer. And I don't know, it's just the way they communicated. I don't know why, but like through the Jamstack, suddenly I needed to make something that was an edge function, or I think I started with Netlify functions, and it was like, well, I can connect to a database, like it's not that hard, like, and then it kind of evolved from there. So it kind of, with its like friendly approach, I was like, well, I can do this. And suddenly now, I guess 8 years later, or how many years later, now I would feel comfortable starting with just like creating an Express application or something like that, where you kind of are much more in the backend space, because I kind of came through it through the like very friendly, and I wouldn't say just beginner friendly, but like, yeah, front end friendly way of doing things when I came into the Jamstack community. I don't know if that helped, but anyway, it helped me, I think, become less afraid of the backend in a weird way.
Yeah, but I'm in a similar camp there, where it feels like, it's the term Zach really likes to use is the time to hello world. It feels like Jamstack really helped us compress that time, and so it does feel really approachable to beginners, but it also feels like it gives any developer trying to build websites this really powerful tool set that does aim to keep things simple. And so I do like the framing around just building for the web and building the best websites that you can. The one thing I wanted to add here, because you had one of the tiles there said marketers or people who want a website. And I go back to the community is definitely inclusive. So I think it's more of, yes, anybody who wants to be in the space can be in the space if they feel like they're getting something out of it. However, it's also, from the beginning, it's been kind of this developer-led revolution. And so I don't think it's really going to stray too far from that if it continues in sort of a natural progression. Does feel like, yes, it's for developers trying to build websites. And that probably means folks who are mostly working on the back end aren't going to get a lot out of it, and that's okay.
So I'm like,
all right, okay.
I'm like, I'm on the outskirts of Jamstack because I come from the WordPress community, which I know is like a bad word in the Jamstack world. So I feel like it's Jamstack kind of evolved as a way to solve the issues around WordPress in many ways. So, out with the old and with the new. So I've been living between these two worlds, and well, to me, it's quite clear that Jamstack is probably, and to some extent, for all of those groups of people, except for the marketers and the people who want websites. One of the things that frustrated me in the Jamstack community, and we were trying to solve at Stratic, was that it was so developer oriented that the people building sites forgot that on a day-to-day basis, the people managing the sites and the very important content that's in the sites are not them. And so they were like second-class citizens, the marketers and the people who just want websites in this world. And so their user experience was quite poor and limited. And I loved, I would hear this, well, but I really need to create this page. Create a ticket for the developer, and they'll create, like, what? No, that's not how it should work. A marketer should be able to get the page up and running, just like they've been doing for the last 20 years with WordPress, and that's how they expect it to work. So the disconnect between the front end and the back end, I know many tools have been trying to solve that, where someone working on the content can't actually see what that's going to look like on the front end. There's no way, there's not really, maybe it's better now, but there's not really a way to preview. That's very limiting. So until that's solved, Jamstack is very much a developer front end of the front end, back end of like all those people, that whole thing.
All the ends.
Like that's for them. But the marketers are left behind, and I encourage Jamstack to remember them because they're very important and they deserve to be recognized as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like most of these websites, developers are setting them up for a non-technical person to manage and create content and get information out there.
Right.
So it's how do we balance that? Because on one hand, if we made marketers and non-technical people the core of the community, then we can't really have technical conversations, and it really, in some ways, it like limits the conversations that can happen to be inclusive of those people. On the other end, they're not included in the community, and then front-end developers can talk front-end, have front-end conversations. I don't know how to balance those two sides. Like, how do we make sure marketers are like thought about with all these decisions, but not limit the conversations that happen for developers? That's a tricky question.
Well, you can maybe learn from the WordPress community.
Yeah.
Because although, okay, again, WordPress lab stack, legacy, not perceived as developer oriented, but there are quite hardcore developers working on WordPress, in WordPress, around WordPress, creating really innovative solutions. While at the same time, because it's a content management system, right? So the content side is always kept in mind, and the content creators. So you can have both. And sometimes they're talking to each other, and sometimes they're talking amongst themselves. Like if you have events or whatever, you have a track. That's what we do actually at WordCamps. A track or talks that are oriented towards the content creators and the marketers, and that it can include how to use tooling that they don't know about to be better at that. And then there's the developer track or the developer talks that are oriented towards that. Both groups need to be happy. I think Jamstack actually has an advantage because it's so developer oriented. And in the end, a lot of decision making happens by development teams within organizations. At the same time, it's often the marketing team that makes a decision. I know that from Stratic, where we would get customers come to us, and the CISO or the CEO would be like, okay, we really don't want to use WordPress because I'm going to stop sleeping at night because of security and all that and scaling. But our marketing team insists. So we're going to use WordPress, but we're going to put on Stratic to resolve those issues. So anyways, they can live together. It's just a matter of opening, like being more aware of it and opening up, I guess, your minds or something to that and making a space for them and welcoming them in. And then also their feedback can make the Jamstack products and the ecosystem better. So anyways, it's possible, is what I'm saying.
And I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I believe Mike's company is actually trying to help marketers preview their content in the Jamstack. So you're in a good space to ask them in to the community.
Definitely top of mind for me.
Go ahead, Joyce.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I really agree on that. And I think not only is it possible, but I think Jamstack is really kind of uniquely positioned because you can mix and match. You can take any CMS system that provides an API access, and then you can take any of the static site generators, and you can combine them to use the kind of content management systems that the marketers like to use, and then build it. You still need a team of developers or a single developer to build the pipeline. But I think it's getting a lot better. I do see the preview issue as one of those challenges, but I think that's come a long way. It's not as good yet as it might be in something like WordPress, where you can just click on preview and you have everything set up. But when I make a PR of my site or like a new blog post, I then get automated preview builds from that, which is kind of a step to that direction, and it's enough for me. But it's also possible to build all the things. We just need to kind of, like you said, we need to bring those people together, the developers and the marketing people, or
100%. And I have some similar background to Mike. And before I came to Netlify, I was at StackBit, and we were trying to solve a similar problem. And what I'd recognized in those years was that the movement was developer first, and it was so compelling that people were shifting overnight because it seemed like it really improved the process of building websites, but it also had massive benefits to the end user. But as we were sprinting along these two paths for these folks, we definitely left the content editors and the folks managing websites kind of behind. And that was one of the things that was really compelling and exciting for me about going to StackBit, because we said, hey, we're working in this space that is generally feels like it was built by developers and mostly to serve us, but also to serve end users. So StackBit was saying, hey, okay, now how do we give the content editors the tools, or at least the same quality of tools that they had when they came from these monolithic frameworks, the WordPresses of the world, where you just got real-time previews and it was trivial. But as you said, it feels like the technology is catching up to that, and that folks have more options today than they did previously. And I don't know that there's a magic answer now, but I think just in what other folks are saying here in that more abstract way, ensuring that we do continue to keep that group of users on the same level, and so we're equally prioritizing the problems that everyone has to keep pushing websites forward.
But I also feel like developers who love the Jamstack, like myself, but I feel like developers in kind of larger organizations often push building websites in this fashion when it's not really a fit. Like they used it for the developer blog, and it's fantastic, and you can even use it to like bootstrap your apps. For instance, like I worked on a large enterprise project where the Jamstack was used to kind of build out the full app, but if you're going to have like a blog with normal users, there are like proven solutions like Miriam know that might serve you better, even though your developers don't love it. And I think in some organizations for a while, developers have had too much power in those kinds of decisions. And I think that is shifting in like how we see the economy now and what is happening in our space, and also other tooling coming up. Like I've started playing around with Framer, which is actually React components that you drag around on a canvas. And it's just like, I was blown away. You're just like, you can draw anything and then you can wrap it in a React component. And they will be releasing a CMS API, I think, within the next couple of months. And I imagine them then being able to pull in from any CMS kind of way. And then you'll have full preview, and it's even like you can draw. I mean, there are things that I don't think kind of
Miriam, you're cutting out a little bit. We might have to wait till you come back.
Hotel Wi-Fi.
Yeah, hotel Wi-Fi's.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Queen's in Portugal at the moment, so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another good segue. This is flowing. Community. How do we foster inclusive, thriving community? Like, I think we touched on a bunch of stuff there on how we could do that. But what is at the heart of this community? What's the hub? What do we do to foster and grow and like create a movement around these ideas? What do people think there?
I think it feels like a pretty inclusive community, but again, I will just bring my learnings from the world of WordPress.
Yeah.
So when we're organizing WordCamps, there's a lot of weight given to making sure that speakers aren't all homogeneously represented. I don't know how else to say that exactly, but that is a factor. And when the people speaking or representing the community are not all the same, then that creates an environment that encourages different types of people to join and feel comfortable there. So it can be gender, race, all that kind of stuff. But it also can be what we were talking about previously, which is have people come and give them a place on a stage at one of the conferences that are marketers, content creators, talk about their experience using the Jamstack and give them a voice. And then that can help pull in people of diverse interests or skill sets as well.
100%. And one thing I'll add to that is that I think we need to make sure that we continue to prioritize but we'll just go back to the time to hello world, that path to building the simplest website. I feel like really opens the space up for being accepting of really early beginners jumping in and then having a place for them to be able to ask questions where some other corners of the internet might not be as friendly and responding to them. So making sure that yes, we can scale, we can support, this pattern supports really serious growing websites at scale, but also your one-page static site, it's perfect for that. It's perfect for as a teaching tool for someone learning. I think that would help as well.
Yeah, and I think in general, this kind of encouragement of what we talked earlier, that, just because it's static or it's simple, doesn't mean that it's technically worse.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of that in the tech world, where it's like, unless you're doing the most complex things technologically, then you're a lesser developer in a way. And I think that's something that I've seen a big shift happen during the 20 years that I've done development. But I think it's still something that we can encourage more and we can focus on, in a way of like, it's not about the complexity of the technology, but it's about what you build with it and what you can do with it and what you have to show at the end. The website and the content of it is what really matters in the end, and not what it was built with.
Yeah, it's easy to forget when there's a shiny new tool right in front of you. So what about the hub of the community? So Jamstack went through a few evolutions. I think they had a Slack channel, which then I think Discord. Yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts on what the best like hub for the community to communicate and build relationships with?
I would love to see something that's a bit more open on the web than Slacks and Discord. Something like a discourse forum or something where people can read and they can access the knowledge that we gather, rather than being walled in a chat. I think that's something that would be also in line with this kind of open web, small web thinking that we have in the community.
Agreed. It feels wrong to not have the conversations happen on an open forum in the web for like it's the heart of Jamstack is that idea.
And I
don't think I was ever
with the inclusive community, making it easier for people to join when it's not behind some kind of like making the threshold to join feel lower, even if it's exactly the same, make an account. But I think that if you can see the discussion, it becomes easier to join, rather than first having to join and then being part of it.
Queen,
Yeah, I was going to say I've never been a part of any of the official one. I think I've logged in, but I Discord, it just goes too fast, and my hair turns grayer every time I open the Discord app. But I think for me it started with just Jamstack Radio, and they had lots of good people on, and I kind of listened in, and then we started talking kind of loosely on Twitter and getting to know, started following people who talked about this on Twitter, and it was kind of like a very loose. For me, always been like a very loose community, not like a place. Like I'll go to this like URL and that's where I find the Jamstack people, but more just like finding things more organically. And I think if I would have wanted something, it would maybe be like could be like a website / newsletter thing that just like showcases the best blog posts from around, not that it has to be like a specific place that this is where the kind of approved blog posts of the Jamstack kind of, this is where you find them, but it's more of a, oh, hey, somebody wrote something interesting there and somebody, you could like send it in, or it kind of in that way more than it being like one place to have a conversation. And I'm definitely for a more like forum style, open style thing if there's going to be something. And especially because I get very...
Yeah. I was man, what a time to cut out. Does anyone else have any thoughts there?
I think following on what she said about the newsletter or something like that, I think Bob, who's probably still in the chat, he has a great 11dbundle.dev, which is exactly that. It's a collection of interesting things that people have built and tutorials that they have written with 11d. And I think something similar for kind of either generically Jamstack or for the other sub-communities. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance because original, like OG Jamstack, it was really at the forefront of all these frameworks coming in. Welcome back.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all good. Yeah, like the Jamstack really created that community, and I think there was a Jekyll community at the time and probably a Hugo community, but they were all sort of self-contained, and Jamstack was that umbrella that went over it. And so we have those communities, like 11d has a community, Astro has a community, Next has a community, WordPress has a community. So what is this community about? Like my gut feeling is it's like about the higher level ideas about the approach, and about why you'd want to go static and how you could make things more static. And in some ways that's like, I to your point before, Miriam, I think WordPress, if it's static, should 100% be included in this community. It like doesn't matter how you get there. The point is that the website is static and it has all these benefits.
It was when I was working on Static, and it was Static still exists, and actually just relaunched as Elementor Static Hosting, just FYI. But I'm talking in the past, but when I was like independently leading our team, I created Static based from inspiration from the Jamstack world, the static site generation, and it's totally inspired by that. And but I had trouble being accepted in the Jamstack community because of like the purist approach, and I totally understand it, especially in the beginning. You want to like be very focused, but Static, because it was based on WordPress, and WordPress still existed in the background in its fully monolithic dynamic format. It was not considered a Jamstack approach or tool or anything like that, which is fine. So I'm just saying that's how it was. And I think a broader perspective, let's say there's headless approaches to WordPress with the REST API. I'm not the only one who worked on a static solution for WordPress, like creating a more welcoming environment for people from the WordPress community. I think there's a lot that everyone can learn from each other. You're speaking about where should this is just an example, but where should, let's say, the hub of Jamstack be? So WordPress has a Slack called Make WordPress with 47,000 people in it or more. It's hard to tell. And everyone knows that if you're looking for someone in WordPress land, or you don't need information or whatever, you go there. I was trying to find this random guy today who created an amazing tool, and I couldn't find his email address. I couldn't find anything. I went to Make WordPress Slack. He was there, and we started chatting. And like, now Slack has its pros and cons. We have this Slack, and it's paid by the WordPress Foundation. WordPress is pretty organized from that perspective, thanks to Matt Mullenweg and Automatic and all that. But so I would say Slack has its disadvantages. Discord can be a better solution maybe in some ways, but having this one hub, and the goal of it could be, first of all, sharing news and innovation in the space, and people who are coming in and looking for they're working on the next project, and they're like, because Jamstack has variety of tooling and solutions and approaches. Like you can like be like, can you help me brainstorm how to approach this next project? It's kind of an app, it's kind of a web, application, and blah, blah, blah. And people can share their experience, show examples, and I think that could be a great learning ground for the community if there is some kind of unified place. So that's just also learning from WordPress.
Yeah, 100% that it's great that these various tools have their own communities and folks are going to be fans of different tools and be tapped in there. And I think that's really valuable. I think the brainstorming idea is great, but to even abstract more, it's part of this, the role of this community is kind of in connecting folks across these different communities so that, just like that, I think it's come up a couple of times today, just recognizing that the same approach or the same tool is not necessarily the best thing to bring to every project. You have to weigh each project individually. And this feels like the place to be able to do that.
Us. Yeah, I think that's great. Another segue. Ooh. Values. So we've touched on a lot of these, I think, but let's try and get something down on paper. So we have community led from previous panels. I heard US say openness, which I think is a great one, and I think you really can speak to that. And you're gonna find out I'm a terrible speller. Openness.
There's more of us.
All right, I still got it wrong.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I think this really does speak to Jamstack. Like, there's so much sharing that happens in this community. Is there any other values that really come to mind with Jamstack, or that should be in Jamstack?
Maybe it's related to openness, but knowledge sharing or something like that.
Yeah, I think I like that. I think it's probably in here.
Yeah.
But I think you had earlier, like working on web standards or like making the best of the web. You had something like that in an earlier slide.
All right. And the groups of people one.
Yeah, maybe it was the groups of people, like fundamentals.
Like building on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like utilizing the platform, I guess is the. I've heard more and more people say that, like lean into the web as a platform.
I like that. Like, I personally agree with that very strongly. The bit that I worry about is whether it goes against the inclusiveness, because like then you start to say like, using React, like you're not utilizing the platform. Like, if that's a core value of the community.
I mean, you can use React in a way that utilizes the platform more or less. Like if it's like the same thing as like static first, like this is, use the platform first, but then sometimes you need to go further.
Yeah.
But if that brings out the the soapbox in people, then you can get rid of it if you want to.
Yeah, I really like it. Yeah, any other ideas here?
Well, you got to static first, wasn't that? Is that a value?
Yeah, it's
or is that something else? I'm not that good with like values versus what is the other thing? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a good
with that.
If that is the core idea behind the community, it kind of makes sense. It would be a value. There was one we talked about before where I don't know the right word, like welcoming. I feel like that doesn't describe every community, but I think it's what we aspire to as the Jamstack community.
I think maybe inclusiveness or being an inclusive community, that at least to me regardless of where they come from or what their starting position is, skill-wise or knowledge-wise.
Yeah, because I think this is such a good, if someone's just entering the web, and learning, starting to learn some of the fundamentals, I see this as a very good place to start, and hope that the community would really welcome someone like that and point them in the right direction and give them tips. Whereas I think a lot of other places in the web, you're going to be thrown in 100 different directions and told that's not the right way to do it. This is the right way. Like I would hope
Or just
that
being
this
told
would
like
be
if you don't know this, then you shouldn't be making website, is something that I've seen around in other communities, where it's like, well, if you know this, you're not ready to make websites, you should just not be here, kind of.
yeah, which
That's true.
and
That's really off-putting. Maybe it's like a principle of or value of like there's no such thing as stupid questions or something like that. Meaning, like don't make someone feel bad because of their lack of knowledge or whatever.
You can tell somebody something is not secure in a nice way, you know.
yeah.
Totally.
Okay, so let's get to the next one of why. Like, why does this need to exist? Like, we have all these sub communities, we have web development communities. Like, what is special about Jamstack and what it is and what it can be that it needs to exist?
I think it was Miriam who said it really well, that because we have so many different tools in the Jamstack community, I think having something that helps us learn from each other and brainstorm what would be the best tools, I think that's something that probably doesn't happen so much in the sub-communities. So like if somebody comes to an Eleventy Discord, the first answer to a question is probably not try another framework, because people are there because they like that one. So I think this kind of cross-polluting of ideas across these different communities can be super valuable.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, we see a lot of folks leading with the tool, maybe rather than leading with what are the goals or what's the best outcome for that particular project. And you need to be able to, or I should say, not you need to, but that this can be a space where you can have those conversations. And it doesn't, I can't think of a good alternative there. And so it's not necessarily even, I do think one portion of the why is, as we just mentioned, that it can be a really great place to come in. But step one, learning how to write websites. This can be a great place to start. But also, even as someone advances, even as we're building complex applications, to be able to do that in a place that can discuss, what you're trying to accomplish first, and not necessarily worry about the tools you're using to accomplish that. That feels like there's a lot of value in those conversations.
I think also somewhere where it's independent from trying to sell a certain tool as well, because I think it's very hard. It's hard to say, what you're making should be made with something completely different. Also, like we mentioned, different tools, but also just saying like, well, this isn't the great use case for Jamstack. There are other tools and approaches, and having people be okay with saying that, and like sending people to those resources, or even maybe helping them in that direction, won't kind of happen when kind of you're trying to sell tools and services that need you to be statics first, or needing to be Jamstack. And I think that would be like a more honest conversation, and also a more honest conversation of where we fall down. Like, where does the Jamstack fall down? I think over the last couple of years, I see a lot of like glossing over of where it doesn't work, where somebody is actually saying, like, as Miriam mentioned also with, this doesn't work for a lot of content writers or the editors. And then we I've seen like a lot of kind of just like, well, it's not that hard. Like they can learn Markdown or, that kind of thing. But it could be somewhere where we could be more kind of honest about those cases where it's like, yeah, that's not working really well. And we can have a conversation about that without being kind of scared that, or without most of the people chiming in being kind of paid by a tool that will be like, no, this isn't the problem.
Yeah.
Because then you're not going to use their tool anymore or their service.
I think that's, I feel like that needs to be a value. Like, how do we word that as a value?
Honesty.
Like intellectual honesty.
Recognizing the weaknesses, like saying them out
that's
loud.
A good one. Recognizing weaknesses. I like that. That's a value.
But it's better for the community if, because then the community together can recommend different solutions or directions or work on solving these issues. Otherwise, you end up with a poor user experience and people churning in certain ways from this approach. So rather say it out loud. It really is better for everyone.
Yeah. Is that how you?
Yeah.
Is that how you said it? Recognizing shortcomings. I've forgotten the word you used.
Weaknesses, I said, but
weaknesses.
Yeah.
Because I think that is part of what kind of led to a little bit of the downfall of the community is exactly that we didn't recognize it, and kind of it's been pushed on projects that should never have been made in that way. Like I'm talking to a potential client and they're like a 4-people team where none of them really are developers, and they have this headless site that's built with Next, and there's like all these kinds of things, and all they needed was a blog. And that is not helpful. Like if somebody down the line when they might need it, or when friends of theirs with different needs say that they're going to go for the same stack, like these people are going to be like, no way, stay away. And then that's not helpful, because that's not what it was supposed, or I feel like that is not a good use of Next and a headless CMS to create a little blog for a startup that is not a tech startup. Like we're just failing ourselves.
Who wins out of that? Okay, the developer got
Nobody
to use
wins.
the tool they wanted to use.
Except the developer that is no longer part of the team. That's who wins.
Does anyone have any last... maybe we'll move to benefits. We've got like 2 minutes left.
Can I just say one more thing about the why? I'll say it really quickly. I think that because the Jamstack seems to be in somewhat of an identity crisis, this is actually the time to create a community around it, because in many ways, projects, approaches, software, whatever, they survive and thrive based on community. It's definitely an important leg of the chair. So strengthening the community can strengthen Jamstack and kind of like ensure its future in a better way. So that's another why.
I think it's the most important thing, because if we're if we're purely talking about an architectural approach and there's only like 3 people doing it, it's not that interesting. What I love about Jamstack is the people and the learning and people are at the heart of it. So last topic, benefits. So in the first panel we came up with portable, immutable, delivered HTML, CSS. It's simple. Like this could be a massive list. We could talk about performance and security and a bunch of stuff. But if you were communicating the advantages to Jamstack as like succinctly as possible, what benefits would you describe to them?
I think it depends a bit on the audience.
Yeah.
But one thing that I've been thinking about a lot when I think about static sites is this kind of emergency performance. When there is like a real life emergency, like a natural disaster or something, and you go to a website to get info, and it is some kind of dynamic site and the databases crash under the load. That's something where static sites can be really powerful. And in a less emergency side, something like a conference. I think every conference should have at least a backup site that is static, so that when you have like even just a text-only static backup that people can access if the servers go down because of the kind of load and the resource need for dynamic sites. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I was thinking like resilience and even future-proof, because it's built on the fundamentals of the web, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Like it's pretty fundamental, and so regardless of what happens going forward, in many ways, it's kind of future-proof. Just to follow up on that point about sites needed in times of like crisis or whatever. So actually, at Stratic, a number of our customers were UN agencies or other relief agencies who wanted static sites so that it was they could rely on it to always be available to the people who needed to access the information, which is an interesting use case. And so that was they were looking for static for that. So yeah, so future proof and resilience. I mean, it's hard to beat the resilience of a static site.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, often said that you might lose the preview and all of that we've talked about, but if you don't touch it, it's gonna stay up. Like, you know, and even if you try to do something and it doesn't build, like you still have your old site, the last built site, which is not true. You know, when I was working in the WordPress space, people could go in and mess up the site, and it would just you would get the messed up site. So, when we talked, Mike, I have an example where I have this audio guide that I deployed last in 2016. If I want to deploy again, I need to upgrade some server at Netlify. I don't know. But as long as I don't touch it, it just keeps playing this audio guide of Oslo. And since it was a project that had like a strict funding they had like a project funding and not like a maintenance type funding, that was very valuable for them because we could actually build it and it's still up even though they don't have maintenance funding for it. I kind of chip in with the little bit of Netlify subscription, but other than that, like it's just like stays up. And
yeah, that's awesome.
And that is for me like peace of mind, not needing to worry that somebody messed something up or logged in and suddenly it's messed up and doesn't work anymore. I don't know what that resilience maybe.
I think one more follow-up on that is that if the server goes down, if the hosting company goes down, you can still deploy it to any other because it's just simple fundamentals. So I think that's also a big part of the resilience is not having vendor lock and not having need to know how to build and deploy and set up all the databases and everything. You can just copy the folder.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, Sean?
No, I was here for this first panel where this is where you landed, and I felt really good about it at that time.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is a solid list.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, this was a great chat. I feel like we got through so much today. That was awesome. So thank you so much for all being here and contributing. Thanks to everyone in chat who's watching. The next steps. This is like the last piece of content we're gonna do for the future of Jamstack. It's been a whirlwind, and I've learned so much.
I think you should pull the next to last comment just up on screen so it's on screen for your edited version.
Yeah, despite us not having crystal clear idea of the values of what Jamstack might be, like set in stone, I think it's really heartening to see that inclusivity angle is always paramount for sure.
And I think that was very important for a lot of us coming in the beginning.
Yeah, I just feel like everyone has brought something a little bit different and a different angle, and I've learned so much over the past like 3 or 4 months doing this. So what's next? That is the question at the heart of this. I'm going to take all of these conversations and this panel and all the panels and like try and create something cohesive out of it, like a piece of video content, and write a blog, and then just start working with the community to take those next steps. So yeah, I feel really good after this panel in particular that like that path is looking clearer and clearer. So yeah, stay tuned for next steps. Yeah, we're gonna do it together. Thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.